The Vampire Coast, one of the DLCs of Warhammer 2. It's personally one of my aesthetically favorite factions. They have a mixed campaign. You do want to build an empire as certain characters. You can build up towns and settlements and such, but also each character has their own boat that they pilot around that you also want to upgrade at the same time. So it's kind of a double empire building? I don't know. A lot of their campaigns also have pirate hunting stuff where you try to prove who has the bigger dick of the high seas by killing other pirates and stuff. It's a pretty fun campaign. You can also kind of take it wherever you want to go because your ship is your home base, so if you want to, you could just leave whatever your starting settlement is, get on the high seas, and start marauding wherever you really want to. A lot of the campaigns play very, very similarly, that being said, and I do think it is a good game thing, but it's not like anything's crazy different. It's not like you're going to play Solostra and have a wildly different experience than Noctil is. I think Luther has the most different, and that's because every 10 seconds he decides he wants to be a different person and gets different buffs and debuffs, so that's kind of fun. Anyway, solve riddles, go find some maps, dig up treasure, raid some places, build a big ship, go hunt a giant sea worm. It's a good time. In multiplayer, the Vampire Coasts have a bunch of extreme units. Good lord selection, though small. Most of the lords have their own niche, from Duelist Luther to Caster Solostra for the lore of deeps, Caster Noctilus for the lore of vampires. You have generics between that are also quite good. Araness Assault Spite is a meme, but she's a cool meme. Your heroes are necessary, but not great. Gunnery Whites have taken some hits, but they were meta through a lot of Warhammer 2. They have extra powder. More powder, there we go. Replenished ammunition, it's pretty critical for the Vampire Coast in a lot of builds. And aside from that, they have like one nice item in Scab's Graith, but on the Rotting Promethean, they can be an okay duelist, though in Game 3 I have noticed them struggling. They're mostly just going to sit and poke with their rifle, but they are expensive, so you need them mostly for the ammunition. You don't take them for the unit itself. Morgul Haunters, I've seen some people use them, but in general I think they're overpriced duelists. And the Vampire Fleet Captain is nice if your Lord is Luther or Aranessa, so you don't have any cast at all. Or you want to switch up what lore you're using, so maybe you want the Lore of Deeps for one spell, and then you want the Lore of Vampires for a different spell. Or the Lore of Death, because they actually have a third one. Right. Your infantry, the cheap ones are blockers. They're meat shields. They don't do much besides stand around and look pretty. And then you have your killers, armor-piercing killers and non-armor-piercing killers. Cool. That's the whole infantry. You figured it out. Missile infantry, varied. Hand cannons are only good at anti-air. Handguns are medium range, good against cavalry, skirmish cavalry, and monsters. Deck gunners are essentially like Jezzails or crane gunners. They're just snipers, but extremely fragile, and bombers will clear out any front line for you. So the missile infantry is a lot of the meat and potatoes of Vampire Coast. They'll carry you through a lot of games. Monsters and beasts are also very good for them. Animate Hulks recently got a buff, so they're nice to mix in. As with most monsters infantry in the series, you're hearing a lot of the same things. They're nice at charging a front line along with infantry and bunker busting it, or locking down cav or big single entities. And dogs, scurvy dogs can chase around archers all day. They do pretty good at chasing off routing units. They're quite core to the Vampire Coast roster. Almost every build has at least two. Mongols are tricky. Throughout most of their history, they've been pretty bad. They aren't armor-piercing anti-infantry stalked vanguard units. They can be nice in some cheese builds or in rush for you're sprinting straight at them and then they try to turn around. There's a bunch of Morgul Haunters blocking them. But in general, you have to be careful. These guys are squishy. And they have some self-healing in the hunger, but it's not going to make up for their 30 armor and 9,000 health. Crabos like to stabbo. They're defensive, is what they say, but honestly, they're just armor-piercing, heavily armored boys, so they're good. They're good in rush builds. Just wait for them. Your large single entities generally suck. The Rotting Prometheans, 150 armor doesn't save it from being gigantic and expensive, so it will get shot to death, and the Deathshriek Terrorgeist is just a dragon, but worse. So, single entity large monsters usually blow. Missile monsters, you have a lot of gun bats. They are also crucial at high levels of play. I don't want to say they're cheese builds, but they aren't main carries. You take these if you think your opponent's not going to have any ranged or very little air pressure, and then if they do, you can get a ton of value if they made a mistake. But they're quite squishy if they get shot, so if your enemy does have range pressure, you're going to have to take that up first before the gun bats can get their value. Lamprey's Revenge and other Rotting Promethean Gunny Mob are just the Rotting Prometheans with guys on top of shotguns. They're fine. Lamprey's Revenge is good because he heals himself. Necrophilex Colossus is good in some kite builds, but otherwise it is weak to archers. Vampire Coast does have pretty good artillery in their mortars, carronades, and Queen Bess. Queen Bess is a special one. Does large damage and in a big explosion. But usually you'll see a lot of the carronades and mortars. Playing as the Vampire Coast, you need to decide whether you're rushing or whether you're sitting. If you're rushing, Sirens and Depth Guard dogs, animated Hulks are going to be the core of your build. Sprint at the enemy, kill them, do great. You have a lot of infantry clearing spells now that the Lure of Deeps has gotten some buffs in Kraken's Bowl, Vangeist Revenge, and Tidecall, all being pretty good. And honestly, even the Wind of Death and Pit of Shades that Noctilus can bring can also help out in a rush. If you're playing defensive, Noctilus has a million summons for you. And you can put a veritable great wall of zombies between you and the enemy and shoot them to death with carronades for large targets, cavalry, and mortars for infantry and archers. The guns defend gun strategy of Anticity is struggling these days, but I guess you could try to pull that off. But for most cases, you just want a few animated hulks running around blocking up cavalry that are going to try and stop your guns from shooting. Yeah. That's the Vampire Coast. Yes. Alright, fighting the Vampire Coast. Archers are pretty good versus them. They have no archers of their own, so all of their gun line is straight shooting, which archer versus gun, archer wins. Gun versus cavalry, gun wins, and cavalry versus archer, cav wins. You know what I mean? So you can do a slow push with infantry and archers, a classic pike and shot build that's quite effective versus the Vampire Coast. Cavalry can do okay. A full cavalry rush can be tough, though. You can struggle into crabs, animated hulks, and guns, so I don't think a cavalry rush is advisable, but you do want some cav, because cav beats the dogs, and dogs can compromise your archers. So if you have a pike and shot build, get a couple cavalry to defend you from the doggos. As I mentioned, when you're building the Vampire Coast, you might have caught on that if your opponent doesn't have ranged, gun bats can win an entire game, so prepare for that. Either bring your own melee flying units to chase down the gun bats, or bring some form of range pressure in the archers to kill them. A melee rush can also work against the coast quite well. This is one of the few times that infantry can carry you through, so Norska actually has a decent shot with Berserkers and Marauder Champions to just push through the front line and do okay. Is that guaranteed success? No, I'm just saying it's possible. So probably either go with the pike and shot build or just a shitload of berserking infantry. Single entities can also be a little difficult for the coast to take down if their guns get shut down. Like Beastmen could deal with this matchup okay by getting Toroks and some Minotaurs. With some throwing axes to kill crabs, obviously. But single entities, archers, elite infantry might be tough for the coast to deal with. And for Lords of Magic, you're going to want to clear out hordes. So again, you're healing a lot of these couple lores, but they are the best at it. Shadows, fire, any specialty lores that have good AoE clearing out spells. You don't really want to tickle the Vampire Coast because being an undead faction, they have tons and tons of healing. So when you cast a spell, it has to kill a bunch of shit right now and get rid of it because damage over time isn't as critical. Also, when you're fighting the Vampire Coast, last note, you need to bring something that can kill a foot character, because Solastra or Noctilus, sometimes even Luther, can stand around on foot, and they can be an absolute nuisance in the late game to take care of if you have nothing that can deal with a foot character. So either bring some armor-piercing anti-infantry, or single-entity sniping spells can do okay, but they're just going to heal through them. Dragon with some breath attacks, maybe. Good cycle charging on that. I don't know. Prepare for a Foot Lord, just in case. Roar!
Subscribe, yes.